Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Starling Childs. Star is the CEO and co-founder of Citiesense, a cloud-based platform for neighborhood development. The platform enables civic organizations and their community members to establish a private data source for information about their neighborhoods by centralizing the tools used to map and manage community assets, such as local businesses, real estate, streets, and parks. Since the platform's launch in 2017, Citiesense has been adopted by over half of the 76 neighborhoods with business improvement districts across New York City, as well as other downtowns in the United States and Canada. STAR's mission with Citiesense is to help downtowns everywhere access and analyze data about local conditions to improve planning and development. Prior to starting Citiesense, Star worked as an urban designer and city planner at the award-winning firm Urban Strategies Inc. in Toronto. Star has over 10 years of experience in the community development industry as a landscape architect, city planner, and GIS expert. Star, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So glad you were able to join us. Please do tell us about yourself and how did Citiesense came to life?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started Citiesense because I believe one of the most fundamental things right now needed to improve cities is actually only marginally accessible to a lot of the people who need access to it. And what I'm primarily talking about here is data. And not just data, but insight into local conditions of a downtown or community, neighborhood to neighborhood. It's the type of information and insight that planners, city planners, developers, designers, local stakeholders of all kinds need really good access to in order to work together more effectively and collaboratively improve cities from this kind of neighborhood up level. So that's really my mission with Citiesense, is to make this type of information accessible to those who can do the most good with it for improving their communities, whether that means improving commercial activity and economic conditions, or maybe improving quality of life and environmental conditions. All these things are ultimately related to really the same data sets when you look closely at busy urban centers and neighborhoods in cities across the country. My background, just to give a few points on how I ended up doing this, I went to school for landscape architecture at Cornell, then ended up working for a city planning and design firm up in Toronto for 4 years called Urban Strategies. And then I went back to school to pursue a degree in environmental studies at Yale. And that was really when I started to explore things more in this kind of local space of GIS data, economic development, land use law, some real estate finance. And a lot of the same indicators kept showing up in the places where I was working as a student, where you just had this need for a better level of understanding about a place, and a lack of data, a gap in that information exchange ecosystem that we're really trying to improve here with Citiesense.
That's so interesting, because also, we, as an architecture and design studio, and we team up with a lot of landscape designers all the time, we're very much guided by sort of like the regulatory book, right? Like, this is the zoning, this is what it allows, and your playground is within that. So you can design for the people, for the neighborhoods, for the communities within that framework. But we don't really have insight into, at least as young firms do, maybe older firms have a better idea of like how those regulations came about. We don't have much insight into like why those restrictions happened. So how do you, like, first of all, I guess, like, can you talk a little bit about that process of those regulations coming to place? If there is such gap there, how are cities managing that really? And how are they guiding themselves in order to create that sort of framework or instructions or guidebooks for the architects and designers and planners?
Yeah, it's interesting that you phrase that as how are cities doing this. My initial point of entry into what I'm working on now was government, and we went to a couple cities. A co-founder of mine when I was at Yale, and I were doing work in my last year there in 2015 with Detroit and with Bridgeport, Connecticut. And we were working with the city government at that point. We have since been focused more with nonprofits at the neighborhood level, but early on, our thinking was if we can provide government with a better framework for opening up access to this information and making it more available, that was going to be the right direction to at least start with. And we learned primarily working with Detroit, actually, that where we needed to start was not the government. It was going to be a lot more effective for us and ultimately for the city to bring this whole platform that we've been building down to the neighborhood level, focus specifically on the day to day use cases of really a very specific group of organizations out there in cities right now, and think of it more as a operating system for their management of a neighborhood and their engagement with that
Mm.
local community, rather than going to cities and saying we want to do this citywide. It should be something for every community. And so at that point, actually, we pivoted a little bit to focusing on New York City as our test case and sort of beachhead market, so to speak, and focusing more specifically on a very unique group, which I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more about on this podcast, called business improvement districts.
Hmm.
And so for us, that was the best way to solve some of those issues that you just mentioned. The lack of connectivity almost in the planning process with regards to creating the best zoning policies, creating the best guides for the land use of different neighborhoods across the city, and really connecting that back to the local conditions in the neighborhood to meet the real needs and opportunities there on the ground. So yeah, that was the kind of earliest pivot we made with the venture, was going from city government and saying, okay, this is not a tool for government so much as it is a tool for the neighborhood level organizations like business improvement districts.
Yeah, but what a valuable learning curve and the right move to pivot, since, like these community districts or local organizations are probably informing like municipalities in a city, right? In order to create those like zoning regulations or any other type of like use regulations. But at the same time, if those local organizations do not have the data or access to data, they're like them informing the city itself would be partially blind as well, because they can only gather so much without having the people's participation in. So that's actually a really great learning curve and a great way to do it. Like approach it to a much more micro and zoomed in level rather than trying to bring in a top down system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background when I was working in consulting as a city planner, urban designer, I was very familiar with working with government as the primary client, um, and that was kind of my instinct. Obviously, going into this was to keep going to government first, rather than going to government, as a partner, but less as the primary user for what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So do talk about BIDs. What are those and why is it important to collaborate with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys may have interviewed Max Musicant a little while back too, or if you haven't, I want to do a shout out to him because he's another alumni who is really focused on working with BIDs, business improvement districts as well. Um, and I think we both agree that they're a real innovation of their own in how cities are being developed and operated these days. They are interesting in that they're nonprofits, they're private organizations that are developed by local stakeholders, so commercial property owners, sometimes
Hmm.
local business owners, to represent the interests of that local commercially active community. And what sets them apart, I'd say, uh, the most out of any other local kind of neighborhood level nonprofit organization is the fact that they are able to self tax and create this steady recurring revenue stream every year uh, that's legislated, from the state government down to the local government, um, and a charter exists within each city they operate in for them to have the city administer this tax. So it's the same as paying your property taxes to the city, but in this case, you're paying an additional little tax on top of that that's going to come right back to your community specifically to fund
Hmm.
local operations. What business improvement districts have traditionally focused on for those local community investments are really sanitation and public safety. They do focus on other things from there, but since their emergence really in the 1970s up in Toronto, actually, and since they've sort of proliferated around the world for that matter, but since their initial um, emergence, the main reason they were formed was to clean up the streets, make the public realm a lot safer, a lot more attractive, and help these commercial areas get people to just come back and park their car or walk to the neighborhood and start using the local business community there. And basically, the way they exist today is very similar to that. It's just a matter of other services that have folded in on top of that, like I said, marketing and managing events, and ultimately still driving towards that same goal of creating a desirable commercial area for businesses and for people that these businesses are ultimately trying to attract.
But it's really interesting that the local stakeholders are actually forming these nonprofits, right? So it's basically a more structured way of like the neighbors in the neighborhood like taking care of the neighborhood, right? Like, and
Yeah,
like not designated roles to each other, but creating this like separate entity that will do things for the neighborhood that will make it a better neighborhood.
that's it. That's what really attracted us to business improvement districts was, the opportunity to really work with sort of a city within a city.
Mm-hmm.
They're given this charter, or the city enables them to have a charter to operate in the public space. So if you look at Bryant Park and you're wondering, how does this park have events all the time and a skating rink and all of these really quite impressive like local activities happening in a public space? The reason and the answer to that is because there's a business improvement district that
Yeah.
enables that to happen, and that focuses on providing private capital into a public area to align with the local community's interests and really activating that public space for their own use.
It's interesting that there is that need still, right? Like, even though you have the city government sort of taking care of your neighborhood, you still need to embed that additional tier in between, sort of to customize the solutions to your neighborhood. So it's, I mean, it's good that the cities support this. So it's kind of like acknowledging that they cannot meet where like the neighborhood needs at all times, and sort of allowing collaboration in order to achieve that. And also it's a way of the neighborhood locals really have active role in taking care of their own neighborhoods. How many are there in cities, like, and are those like across cities, or are those in like more dense cities like New York City?
Certainly, there's more in the larger cities. New York has over 76, and there's generally one or two formed each year. In New York City's case, they're fortunate to have the leadership of the Small Business Services Department and the neighborhood development group there. Other cities have less of a kind of government partner at the local level.
Mm.
So I think it's great when there's a city that has this sort of, codified group who's really there to support the development bids and the services that they provide to their communities. Um, in terms of where else are bids, though, I mean, they're in cities as small as 5,000 people, or towns for that matter. They represent maybe a Main Street set of businesses there, and then of course they're in cities as large as New York and beyond. There are over 2,000 of them across the U.S., and I know that they exist in a few other countries like Australia, the UK, certainly, and beyond as well. So I think they're a emerging trend in general.
Mm-hmm.
What excites us the most about them, though, is that they really represent this on the ground, um, you know, collaboration, uh, and sort of a way to pull leadership into the framework of collaboratively building a neighborhood and representing
Yeah.
stakeholders in that area somehow. You do have lots of other groups that serve similar functions in cities at that local level. But I think at the end of the day, business improvement districts certainly are one of the most formally organized versions of that process.
So let's zoom into the process of how you work with business improvement districts. So they come to you recognizing some lack of information they have, or they need more information, or you sort of help them collect the information from the beginning.
Yeah, so we call our platform a neighborhood knowledge platform. And the reason we chose that as a term of sorts is really focused on this term knowledge management. In the software space, it may be a little bit old fashioned at this point, but it was a term used to refer to large kind of many to one data platforms like Salesforce and productivity software for large corporate businesses that needed to manage multiple departments, multiple logistics, and uh, we thought the same thing really applied to a neighborhood, but instead of it being one business, we're talking about several different businesses, separate stakeholders that all need to still have similar comprehensive data infrastructure and platforms like Citiesense put in place, but a clearer way to apply that type of technology to a neighborhood rather than a company or some other kind of less geographic uh, focused organization. So for Citiesense, we offer business improvement districts and any other neighborhood level nonprofit organization, whether it's a university campus or a downtown development authority of some kind, a way to basically put all their information into one place in the cloud and improve access to it for those that need to work with these different data sets. We organize our platform into three main categories. One of those categories is real estate. So that's
Mhm.
really focused on commercial space in the case of a business improvement district, tracking things like vacancy and occupancy and the different types of businesses in those spaces, maybe number of employees in different businesses. Um, Another important category for our platform is public space. Often business improvement districts will use it to create a really good inventory of all their different community assets, streetscape assets, things in parks and plazas, and
Mm.
track the issues associated with those so they can be quickly improved or resolved rather and fixed. So that would be like tracking all the hanging baskets along one street or the park benches and removing graffiti as quickly as you can with your resources there from the bid. And the third category in the platform is businesses and people, and that really represents something similar to a customer relationship management software suite like Salesforce, which we provide a direct integration with in the platform. So between those three categories, you've kind of got the operational sphere of influence that a business improvement district would bring to bear and the operations they provide to their communities.
It's very interesting that you can also like further that data into like in the future, and as the platform develops, like not only just like the data around you know local like projects happening and planning, or retail spaces, or occupancy, or population, but more so even the psychological data around people and the neighborhoods. Like really for the platform to thrive, all it needs is more participation. You can technically collect so much local data, which could give so much great insight to real estate developers, businesses that are coming in, businesses that want to sort of redesign their spaces. Like, how do you really understand what the locals need? Or even like when you're trying to rethink some of the parks or public spaces. Like, I think it's endless how much more you can integrate in there, and how much more insight like the platform can allow. So that like potential of it seems very exciting for us. And I guess like I'm also thinking, if something like Citiesense existed maybe years ago, like we wouldn't have seen maybe cities in like New York City, where yes, like a nice public space is maybe created, but it came with a lot of gentrification, changing the fabric of the neighborhoods, recreating the neighborhoods, pushing out people, and being heavily criticized for those too. But still, I mean, maybe it's a touristy attraction, but it's definitely not accessible to all. So like in those scenarios, I feel like the localities were very much ignored. Um, and something like this, like it would have been amazing to sort of like uh, for the business improvement districts or any other local communities have such hard data to back themselves and go to the city or really like defend their neighborhood, saying like this is what we want as a neighborhood, you can't bring this here, or you need to provide this access, or we don't want to have so many high-rise luxury developments in our neighborhood. Like all of those, I think it could have had such great impact.
Yeah, definitely. So that's very much touching on the direction we're going in with the company and the platform right now. Step one, which we've been working towards over the past few years with really the New York City business improvement districts primarily, has
Mm-hmm.
been just to make sure they have a platform that enables them to track all these really, important local conditions in their districts. And we've been successful in scaling to over half of the bids in New York with that initial product. The next phase of our company's development is really to focus more on that community engagement side of the platform to enable not just the bids community of merchants and property owners in the district, but also their partners and service providers to get better access to some of these local data sets that I think, ideally are super reflective of that missing information, that kind of gap in the information exchange in these downtown areas where if any kind of city planning or development that comes forward out of better insight into these local conditions is happening, if that's reflective of those conditions, that would really mean success to us as far as we want the company to be filling the void there.
Yeah, almost like a community Yelp. Like it's not a restaurants, but people sharing their feedbacks and insights and like their day-to-day struggles. If this gets like even real time in the future, it's even more exciting. Like, oh, today the air pollution in the neighborhood is really bad. Let's look into it. Why? Or there's some event going on there. Like I think the potential there and the opportunities are endless, and it would be very exciting to see your progress and continuing work with business improvement districts. But how else do you think, like, what type of local organizations you might be able to work with, or what type of alliances you can also create?
Yeah, I think, business improvement districts, while they're a great model, I've actually seen a lot of nonprofits that don't operate business improvement districts, get a lot more done, so to speak, than some of
Hmm.
the business improvement districts I know out there. And I think really what it comes down to is how well these organizations can connect with their communities of business owners, property owners, stakeholders that they're ultimately serving, and how well they can work together collaboratively towards the needs that they're all able to identify. Um, One of our closest partners, we've been working with them, really since day one, I think, in New York, is the Long Island City Partnership. And they're an interesting organization in that they do have a business improvement district, the LIC bid, but they also have this local development corporation, which is really kind of an umbrella organization, a membership organization that the bid is part of. Um, and I want to bring that up because I think it's an important uh, distinction between some of the organizations that operate these kind of confined district boundaries where their influence is really on those single properties that are in the bid,
Hmm.
and other types of neighborhoods which of course extend beyond bid boundaries in some cases. So having that kind of local development corporation to pick up and engage other community members that aren't really necessarily in the bid specifically is super valuable in the case of what I've seen in Long Island City. I'll also mention that we have been testing since November last year this new sort of consumer facing product with Long Island City called the LIC Local uh, platform, and that's a tool where one of the problems we wanted to address with them was, or the challenges I should say, is the engagement with different businesses and different events happening around the neighborhood. So LIC Local was a way for them to leverage what they'd been working with in Citiesense to kind of curate all this really good on the ground local data. And you mentioned Yelp, basically a way to uh, deploy their own kind of local Yelp service for the community, that the community could curate information about events, business activities, perks, discounts, and share that through these QR code signs
Mm.
that people could scan around the neighborhood. And we've seen some good use of that whole system, particularly where there's hotels and residential buildings, and people are looking for, they may know Yelp, they may know Google Maps, they may know their kind of reliable third party apps that are out there. But then when they see a sign that says this is your local guide, it gives them that kind of locally curated gateway into engaging all of these great things around Long Island City. So that's just to say that I think LIC and the Long Island City Partnership have been a really interesting community in terms of their participation in some of these more innovative approaches to managing their districts and their neighborhood community.
Yeah, it sounds very collaborative, and also helps mobilizing the community too. I mean, maybe it's not about events or specifically being at some place, but even at times like a pandemic, it would be even helpful in like mobilizing on the needs of the local communities or businesses, right? Like there has
Yeah,
so much shift has happened in the past few months in the city, for example. Like, how do you think like if local neighborhoods were to utilize Citiesense, like it would help them sort of mobilize or work more collaboratively with the bids? Like, how do you think like a platform like this could also help in the face of like a crisis like this?
yeah, and that's really playing out, as we speak here. Again, with regards to how the business improvement districts are these local partners for the city in terms of testing things and really deploying new approaches um, to address the issues that we're all facing with coronavirus right now. Um, it was interesting to see how quickly a lot of our clients using Citiesense were able to reach out to their businesses and get a really good, accurate, up to date record of hours of operation, whether they were temporarily closing, changes to the services, and share that information locally so that people could still go and participate
Oh, amazing.
in their local, support their local businesses. A lot of the third party platforms that we're also used to using, again, like Google Maps and Yelp, those companies are not stakeholders in these, downtown areas. They're just third party platforms that we're also used to. So they weren't they were, I wouldn't say caught off guard, obviously, but they just weren't prepared to deal with the quick, rapid change of local conditions that these neighborhood organizations like business improvement districts were tracking daily. So
I mean, not even months later. Like I think yesterday I was Googling, trying to understand if like services, if they were open, and all Google says is like hours may vary, like, and we're like how many months into it now? So it is not easy to do when you're trying to like do it top down or, afar really.
oh, absolutely. And I mean, one of the surprises I've had over the years of working on this is how much technical, I guess the word is illiteracy, or there's a lack of technical literacy, I should say, at that neighborhood kind of small business community level. And a lot of people don't update their business on Google Maps or post on Yelp. So to have a partner like a local development corporation or a business improvement district who can add capacity in that gap and really help these business owners carry their business into the 21st century here and make sure that they're not missing out on some of the opportunities, um, it adds a lot of value. And I think that's what we're
Yeah.
seeing with tools like LIC Local is this great collaborative um, push to get everyone moving in the right direction and move the commercial activity for the neighborhood in the right direction. And then obviously in turn comes the quality of life for the neighborhood as well.
I love it. It works like a platform of collaboration. It works like a decentralized Google almost, or like a more up-to-date, like local, search engine, or like forum, or like feedback center. And the more, it's very collaborative with the local organizations too, because the more the organization, pushes us forward, it empowers and mobilizes the local community further, and more the community participates, the others and everyone else wants to participate. So it all feeds each other really well. And we're fans of the platform, and we really look forward to it to grow to into like across US, really, hopefully globally. So I guess to wrap up our conversation, what would your advice be to anyone who is going into any sort of industry, really, that are trying to make progress or push the boundaries a little bit for positive change?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question right now, considering how many things have sort of been turned upside down and looked at a
Yeah.
different way. Um, I I'd say that the the most positive developments I've been part of, not only with Citiesense, but before that, have always come from getting really good insight again into that need or that pain point. And that really has driven a lot of the kind of innovative design solutions. And I'm sure we hear it a lot, but there's reason to echo, I think, the need to really understand the mechanics and the dynamics of these pain points
Yeah.
in order to provide innovative solutions to anything out there. So right now, with people thinking about things differently and cities being able to kind of leverage that to make some policy changes or to try things out and think more innovatively about the best way forward, it's a really good time, actually, I think, to propose solutions, but solutions that are really based on a good understanding of how things work on the ground in these various places.
Yeah, just pause and reflect and try to create more sustainable solutions. So true. Well, thank you so much, Star. This was a pleasure.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our handles in the description below. And don't forget to join us next week.